So why don't you like begin by telling me a little bit about yourself and how you came to be at the place where you are?
Good. All right. So my name is Irami Osei-Frimpong. I'm a grad student at the University of Georgia. I'm originally from California. I was born in California. My dad is from Ghana and my mom is from South Carolina. And I'm from California. Now I'm priced out of California. It's very expensive to go there now. So I'm priced out of my birth state. And I'm in Athens, Georgia right now, where the weather's nice and the living's cheaper. And I study philosophy and kind of like freedom, pretty much the realization of self-determination and what that entails and how we get it confused and kind of distort ourselves and other people about what that means and how all of these structures kind of both ideological and material work together to confuse us about why we are not just depressed, but maybe even unfree or in a quality of poverty that might not even be material.
Right, that's pretty crazy that like you got from the fact that you miss going to California and then you're stuck in Athens, Georgia, and like spiritual poverty. So that's like the kind of sweeps that you make. But before I get to your work specifically, like more generally, I just wanted to get a sense of like how you came upon like podcasting and like how you found your audience and what your experience has been like.
I mean, it's tricky, right? So finding an audience is hard because we try to pretend, we like to think that the internet is perfectly suffused among the populace, but that's just not true, right? That's like people don't have broadband everywhere. I like to think we could compete with Fox News or the mainstream media, but that's just not true. So you're going to self-select a certain kind of people who actually have access, and then distribution is going to be tricky because how do people find out about your podcast? How do people find out about your Twitter? So that ends up like there are still mechanisms of policing and distribution, even in like the Wild West that is podcasts, and people don't have an infinite amount of time. So you have people curating which podcasts they're going to listen to or which thinkers they're going to listen to. And I just try to, get the arguments out there and see what sticks. But it's not as if it's a perfect meritocracy or anything like that, because there are, I'm on Rising. I assume you found out about me.
Yeah. That was the gateway drug. Yeah.
It just so happens that I got to Crystal when she was looking for ideas. Right. So now we go back and forth pretty regularly, but I met her before she was before Rising was as big as it is. Now, if I were just to introduce myself, I don't know if she would respond to I think I just DM'd her out of the blue saying, nice segment. Have you thought about this and this? And she was like, oh, I never thought about this. And then we started going back and forth. But I don't know if that happens. Twitter's interesting, right? So with Twitter's is interesting because media personalities need it in order to distribute their message. So like in order to be a media personality now, you almost have to have a Twitter account.
Right.
But that leaves you vulnerable to like people like me.
Right.
Vulnerable to the hoi polloi in a way that I don't know if journalists are ready for that kind of vulnerability.
That's what we like to think, right? Like when we listen to these people, we kind of tend to think that like they're actually human in every possible way that we are. But there is like, and I mean, in a kind of funny way, I am like kind of lumping you with me, which I don't even know if that distinction is like, if there's a distinction or if we're on the same page as far as that's concerned. But like definitely with the podcasting universe, like I think there's definitely growing this rift between and us versus them as well. Like I think that, like you said, like I don't know if a crystal ball will be as accessible now, right?
I don't know. I think I go on there and I don't hold my tongue usually. I've only had one segment that we taped that she didn't actually air because she thought it was too hot.
Would you want to tell me about that, man? Like that's almost like a scoop here.
Well, it was John Lewis, right? So we did a segment right after John Lewis died, and I was like, this guy has been owned by the Clintons for 20 years, and he spent the last 20 years selling Black freedom to the worst kind of Democrats in exchange for doing nothing. So when Bill Clinton said, thank God we had John Lewis instead of Stokely Carmichael, that wasn't good for Black people. John Lewis was the Black person Bill Clinton picked, and Stokely Carmichael might have been the Black person we needed. So yeah, that segment got cut. But but every other segment, I've done like 7 or 8 segments with them now. They air. which is,
Yeah.
they don't have to.
And
And
yeah,
I'm sure she
I
doesn't.
also saw you kind of like told Sagar to his face that JD Vance is like a grifter, and I thought that like that was kind of fun as well. I don't know if you got like did you hear back like where you told anything about that? Like what did they think like when you
No, they
personally
aired the
offend
segment.
them?
They aired the segment.
Right.
So I appreciate, and this is one thing we're going to talk about, just immigrant narratives and the inability for Americans to see that, the Africans they know, the Indian Americans they know, the Chinese Americans they know are not emblematic of like the state of Africa, China, or India. Like you're seeing a certain class with certain class commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Like my mom's from South Carolina, just grew up like regular black in South Carolina. My dad's from Ghana. His dad owns stuff.
Right.
like
Right.
whole farms, and like he was an upper class guy in Ghana, right? So it's
Mm.
not like the disproportionate. So like we don't know what caste Sagar is or his parents are. We don't know. Like, and nobody asks, where does Kamala really, what caste does she come from? Like that question isn't asked when like I think it's totally relevant to understand their caste and class commitments in the policy they push. And I wish I got, actually, who I want to speak about this? What's her name? Shama Sawant up in Seattle. Because
Shama Sawant. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I think I would love to get her on the intersection of caste and class in America,
Mm-hmm.
about like with respect to Indian Americans and how that kind of distorts like what we consider like person of color politics or whatever. Like, and then I think she would actually say something, because people talk about model minorities, the people who come here and pretty much functionally uphold white supremacy and don't really challenge. They don't
I mean,
challenge anti-worker politics.
but before that, like before we get into like the specific politics, I want to like get into your kind of worldview about like freedom, which you talk about a lot, and like it's something that I mean to give you a little bit of very quick background about myself. I write poetry mainly,
Right.
and I am like trying to enter the discursive world through poetry, because I feel like I work with language and politics works with language, and I think that like I see a lot of stuff that I feel like I might have an angle. And one of the things that I have been coming to terms with, or at least tried to encounter, is what Foucault called like the practices of freedom. He's basically still speaking from the standpoint of like neoliberalism, and like he's kind of confining himself to the kind of idea of the individual as like an entrepreneur, etc. And I wanted to get your sense of what your understanding of what freedom is, and like where you derive that framing for starters.
All right. So the idea, the liberal conception of freedom is that we get to kind of choose what we want to do with our life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And freedom's going to be found in our ability to choose. The problem is you have to understand that freedom is also going to be found in the content of the options among which we choose. And this is what liberals are worse about, because you have to talk about production and how we produce options for each other and what that means, right? So when I explain this to students, I talk about the vegetarian who walks into a restaurant and they have a choice between chicken, steak, and fish, right? So they have choices, but do they really have freedom? Or in choosing, do they actually alienate themselves in the act of choice? So they choose into an unfreedom. So until we have a freedom that accounts for both the form, which is choice, and the content, which is the options among which you choose, and we're honest about how we form options for each other through our relationships and through our interactions, then we have a one-sided and kind of empty notion of freedom. And it'll get us confused, right? Well, and then when I talk to students, I always I give them a few shocking statistics about like marriage happiness rates, for example.
Right.
Because in the US, we always assume that like, we do it right. We should just be able to marry who we want to and divorce who we want to. And like the people who do arranged marriages must hate their lives. And then you actually look into the data, and it's just not that simple
Right.
in terms of happiness, stability, all of these things. Versus when you think about arranged marriages versus like romance marriages,
Mm-hmm.
In terms of stability, happiness, longevity, the satisfaction, it's just a complicated story. And so
Right.
Americans who think obviously we've done it better because we've just given everything just lots of choice. Well, you have choice
Mm.
among like bad, unstable options.
Right.
And then you compare that to like no or little choice among relatively stable options. I mean, I think the ideal situation is going to be the best of both, but like you have to understand that mere choice actually inserts instability, right? You
Right.
don't want all of your relationships, all of your most meaningful relationships to be like take it or leave it.
Right, right, right. I
So
mean,
we're
in
gonna
a kind of way, unless you have infinite choice, you either have like no choice or you have infinite choice.
right,
And I feel like that's like the only two extremes, right, of freedom. Like you're,
right.
because the way that you're thinking about it, if form and content, and I kind of want to go back to that because
Yeah.
that's like what a Platonic kind of you're coming at freedom from that standpoint, or like
Yeah.
from the ancient
I
Greek
do a lot of
standpoint.
work on Hegel. I do a lot of work on
Right.
Hegel, who's kind of a
Okay.
neo-Aristotelian himself. But yeah, the form of freedom is going to be choice. The content of freedom are the options among which you choose. Like
Right.
freedom has to be represented in the options you choose, not just your ability to choose them. You need to find yourself in your options. If you want to go to college and study English literature, but you're at an engineering school, you could either study mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, or civil engineering. You're like it. You every choice you make is going to be alienating. There's a decent book on this called "The Subject of Liberty" by Linda Hirschman, who said
Mm.
she actually realized this when she went to a domestic abuse shelter, and she was dealing with all of these like women who were choosing to go back to their abusive spouses, and she was like, I don't understand why they did it. Why couldn't they stay? But like actually going back in a way was more stable because it turns out like for a lot of reasons abusers are the most abusive when you're threatening to leave. If you actually just kind of stably stay, they kind of calm down a little bit and they get to see their kids. It's less unstable than, for example, always looking over your shoulder and abandoning your kids or whatever. So for a lot of reasons they had the choice to stay or to go, but none of those choices actually were tantamount to freedom. So we need to actually think about what kind of options do we need to produce for each other for us to actually be free. It can't just be about choice. And liberals will tell you it's about choice, but it's going to be a choice between a lot of crappy options, and you'll just find yourself choosing your way into being miserable.
Yeah, right. And like that's kind of like I think the game of like neoliberalism itself, which I have like, and I mean, I come at it also from like a position of I can't say disadvantage because like I grew up like working class. My parents both like worked, but I come from the community of like I come from the Dalit community, which is like my dad is was like untouchable, etc. So it was like his dad had a problem. He kind of was able to climb up the ladder because of affirmative action, etc. I had like a even more of a leg up, etc. So kind of having come through all of that, I do like reach this point of like, well, when do I get out of that? That's where what you're saying is interesting as a contrary to neoliberalism, because neoliberalism says, well, you be whatever you want, but what you're actually saying is that you would go ahead and institute. I like the phrase instituting freedom and justice. What is your vision of like instituting such kind of freedom and justice?
Right. So there's going to be a revolutionary struggle. I mean, you're facing a revolutionary struggle that someone like Kamala Harris just doesn't care about, right? So like you're worried about if you're actually trying to figure out how to break the caste and class of American, you know, like stability. It's a revolutionary struggle that other people who are comfortable with stratifications, generational stratifications, just aren't going to have a problem with. Right.
Hmm.
So first we have to clarify what the problem is. We have to clarify that people have multiple interests. People have multiple interests. And we have to kind of understand that just because everyone's brown or just because everyone's even black doesn't mean they have the same interests, aesthetic, ideological, or material interests. So we need to
Hmm.
clarify like what these interests are and what freedom looks like in all of these different arrangements. So there needs to be a cultural intervention. Art's going to be very important. So like keep writing the poetry, but like like even more muscular cultural interventions. Like I want to take over. Like what would happen if like there was like a Dalit run television show like about this from the Dalit perspective in the US, having to deal with like, you know, jerks. Like, because I read a piece, was it last week, about a Silicon Valley like
Right. Yeah.
lawsuit. Yeah,
Right.
that like it's saying that like Brahmins discriminate in a way that like white people do not take seriously.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like the first and second generation Dalits are getting passed over for jobs and interviews like left and right. And we're not going to ask Sagar where his parents are from, but I have some ideas. Like I'm not going to ask because maybe it's rude, but like, is it relevant? I think it might be. And like, I think as a matter of disclosure, I think it might be. I like this is why like I want to know. Even Pramila Jayapal, like I have questions about her.
As far as I know, with the exception of like with the exception of like the Muslims who are like basically the backward classes in India. I think all of anybody who's been on TV or even YouTube, you know,
yeah,
I mean, like
Indian I see on television,
more or less, yeah, more or less.
I just assume I could just.
When you say instituting freedom and justice, I kind of wanted to get a sense of how far you wanted to go and like what basically you mean when you say instituting, and like does that mean electoralism? How much does electoralism play a part in that instituting freedom and justice for you? And were you on board with it for the Sanders campaign, or like was it a specific case? What's the deal?
So electoralism is going to be tricky, right? So we have to get rid of the cartel that is the political parties in some way, right? And I think with congressional elections, it's actually a pretty good intervention. We need to talk about how we make incumbent congressmen accountable. Congresspersons are elected every 2 years, but once you get the seat, it's kind of hard to move you out. You could be like Nancy Pelosi, who's had the seat since '87, has never sat for a debate. Challengers want to debate her. Shahid Buttar has been tried to debate her for the last year and a half. She just wouldn't agree to a debate. So if you're an elected official, but you don't agree to a debate, a contentious debate, then like you pretty much have been enthroned. Like nobody has a chance to knock you off because it's what I call not voter suppression, but is electorate disadvantage, right? The electorate is structurally disadvantaged relative to the party. And the party has its own interests about like donors and all of that. And the electorate has its own interests. And unless the electorate can hold the party functionaries accountable, then the electorate's at a relative disadvantage. So I don't want term limits with respect to transparency. And I talked about this on my last show. I'm not a big fan of term limits because I do want the electorate to have the power, but we need to be honest about the machinery of democracy insofar as we need to institute debates. Like there needs to be some sort of public accountability measure. Because right now, Nancy Pelosi doesn't take hostile interviews and she doesn't debate opponents. So when you elect her, it's like, I remember in 2002 when Saddam Hussein got elected. And then the ballot was like Saddam Hussein, yes or no. And it turns out he got 99% of the ballot. That's pretty much what it's like electing these congresspersons, because you don't know anybody else. You don't really know what your congressperson is for because they've never had to publicly be for anything in a hostile way and defend it to the electorate. It's just the party shoving these people down your throat. So I think now is actually like right now is a good time to talk about what kind of transparency needs to occur and needs to be structured so the electorate can freely choose between these options as opposed to choosing its way into alienation. It's not a competitive election if there's no real way for her to lose or be held accountable.
How confident are you that at the Democratic primary level, like all the stuff that the Democrats accused the Republicans of like doing, like gerrymandering and like engineering the district, voter suppression, etc., they deployed the same tactics against like Bernie Sanders and like made sure that they posed the same kind of disadvantages to younger voters, etc.
I still think Bernie won Iowa in 2016. Like I want to see the raw vote count. I want to see the raw Iowa 2016 vote count because I think he won. And I don't trust the Democratic. Are you in California or which state are you in?
No, I live in New Jersey.
Oh, okay, you're in New Jersey. Like, I don't trust any of the party functionaries. Like having worked with the Democratic Party, even locally or in the statewide, like I don't trust any of those functionaries to be up and up. Like, I think they will throw out ballots and do whatever it is, and like I do not
Right.
trust any of them.
And I also kind of like want to get to, because you pointed out that you worked in the Democratic Party, like at the local level. Like, give me a sense of what it's like in Georgia, and how they actually like beat it out of you, how structurally fucked up it is,
Yeah, I
to
mean,
get a good sense. Yeah.
I started in 2006. I moved to Chicago, and because this guy Barack Obama had just won a Senate seat, and I was like, oh, this guy seems pretty cool. 2005, and so I moved to Chicago. I interned in his office, and I see that I'm not particularly impressed with the staffers in terms of their integrity or thought, and I end up working for Chance the Rapper's dad, a guy by the name of Ken Bennett. And for those who don't know, Chance the Rapper, his dad is like one of the biggest political operators in Chicago and like the
Wow.
state of Illinois, which is a very like machine democratic state. So I'm working for Chance the Rapper's dad. Before anybody knew who Chance the Rapper was, but his dad Ken Bennett was Barack Obama's chief of staff. So, by the way,
Wow.
anybody who tells you that Chance the Rapper is some independent rapper who made no, that's not how it worked. He had
Yeah.
Barack
Damn.
Obama and Michelle Obama's cell phone number in his cell phone. That's how you become an independent success.
Right.
Right? So I'm working in the office, and my job is to write letters of recommendation for nonprofits who want to apply for grants, except there are certain nonprofits that I'm allowed to write for and certain nonprofits I want. I remember one prison program came through the office, and it wanted to was like getting money for GED classes for prisoners. And I wasn't allowed to write that letter of recommendation because it was going to make Obama look soft on crime. And he was thinking about running for president in a few years. So I was like, this is a little bit shady. So I did that for a stretch, and I was like, this isn't, this guy's not that guy. And and just locally, I think party functionaries are crooks. We don't have the greatest ethical education about democracy and what it means. So once people get into power, liberals or conservatives, they just think they should be able to do what they want to do because they want to do it.
Right.
And that's you see it at every level. And in Georgia, it's interesting because, well, for a few reasons, but let's take John Lewis's seat. John Lewis died, and then the chair of the state Democratic Party kind of appointed herself, and now is going to have the seat forever.
Wow.
It's going to be hard to knock her off unless there are like some sort of transparency and accountability measures put in. Right. So apparently Dick Cheney did the same thing with George W. Bush, where he was like the chair of his vice presidential search committee. And then it was like, who'd be a good person? Me. So Nikema Williams, the person who was supposed to like organize the election for John Lewis's seat and an appointment for John Lewis's seat, just kind of decided that it would be good for her. And so now she's the congresswoman from, the 5th district.
From what you're saying, it seems like power is dictating what people do, right? Like ultimately, how is the power related to ideology? Like in terms of how much do they care about anything? Like, because like that, what I'm seeing is like a more emptier kind of power craving than an ideological one.
Right. So that's one of the exponents of liberalism. Liberalism means I don't have to care about anything. I can do what I want because I want, and that's just. And anyone who like says it says some sort of external constraints on my wants or even internal constraints on my wants is oppressive. They're oppressing me. So like that's one of the ugly sides of liberalism. All right, so the story of liberalism as like a progress is that before in traditional societies or pre-modern cultures, you had to do what the tradition told you to do. If your parents were butchers, you had to become a butcher. If your parents were bakers, you had to become a baker. If the community wanted you to be a doctor, then you became a doctor because that was just what was expected of you for the good of the community. You didn't have really any choice, and your freedom was the freedom to do what you were supposed to do. And if you weren't allowed to do what you were supposed to do, then you were oppressed, right?
Right.
But you never had a real say in what you were supposed to do. The innovation of liberalism is like, no, people should have like a subjective choice in what they do with their life and how they contribute. So we organize markets so that everything kind of gets done, like generally, but people have a say in what they and how they figure in the production of doing it.
Right.
And so like that's kind of a good thing, right? So you're emancipated from the external dictates of culture and convention or tradition or religion or some sort of, but then it puts all of this, the authority of like what you want into public view. So like now you get power and you should be able to do what you want to, when you want to, because you want to. There aren't any like objective constraints into how you wield your power. And so that's like liberalism gone mad, and why like Democrats, especially liberal ones, are just as bad when they get power, because they don't understand constraints. Like they will cheat just as much as Republicans, because it's not like they do it out of like a rich understanding of the content of freedom. They just like have a like an awareness of what they want, and they think that what they want and their power to realize it should be accounted for and is the most important thing. And this is why, like, when you look at someone like Kamala Harris's aspiration and the people who look up to her, they don't look up to her because of her policy. They look up to her because she validates personal ambition.
Right.
Right? This is a woman who, like, you know, look, when I first heard about Kamala Harris, I was in Northern California, and she was just a woman who was sleeping with Willie Brown. Like that's just how I knew it. Like, I don't know. There are lots of ways. Like I'll just tell you, that's how I found out about her. Right. And then now as a DA of San Francisco. That's just what I knew of her. And so, like, when we hold up Kamala Harris, it's not because we actually believe in anything she's going to do. We just believe that personal ambition should be honored, and no one's personal ambition should be degraded because of things like gender. So if Kamala Harris has the ambition to be the president, then she should be able to be a president. So that validates like little girls, like unmediated ambition all across the nation. And that's what progress looks for, validating ambition for ambition's sake, not for like anything she's actually going to do.
But in one of the videos, you kind of get to this analysis or dissection of Stacey Abrams, whom I would love to talk about a little bit, as Napoleonic. And she's actually like an embodiment of personal ambition. If subjective ambition helps institute justice, then you can get on board with it. But Kamala Harris doesn't even have that, though. And that's what I'm like. And I wanted to ask you if it's part of the Democratic Party's project to give you that the symbolic victory without the instituting justice deliberately. Is that like part of the agenda?
So I'll put the whole argument for your viewers. So Stacey Abrams, I met her. She is brilliant. She's very, very smart. Like, everything works very quickly in her mind. Like I said on my podcast, I would not want to play her in chess because I would lose. Or actually, I'd want to play her in chess, but I would lose, right? So like, and so 15 years ago, she decided to reform the entire state of Georgia into the kind of state that she can win. And in order to do that, she had to register like hundreds of thousands of Black voters. So she got on her horse, like Napoleon riding around Europe. She got on her horse and like was like doing whatever it took to register voters. Like, you remember during the election, this is the last election, Mike Bloomberg was offering anything, like was offering to pay anything for support. And like she took a $5 million check from Bloomberg. Like, she was willing to do anything to turn Georgia into the kind of state that would elect her. It just so happens to be that the kind of state that would elect her is one where Black people vote. Right. So it happens to be that her personal ambition was coincident with like instituting justice for Black communities. And like, at the end of the day, hopefully the infrastructures through which she registered those people who vote will sustain. So it's kind of a happy accident that it works out, and it might be good for Black communities. And honestly, if she runs for governor, if Georgia, it'd be good for Georgia because it'd be easier to like organized under Stacey Abrams administration than it would be under the current Governor Brian Kemp's administration. So but it's all about Stacey Abrams for Stacey Abrams. Make no mistake.
Right.
And I want to bring it back to the immigrant story here because there are a lot of recent immigrants. And I don't know if my dad, he passed away. I don't know if he falls into this, but there's like there's a sense about like, yes, of course, America's white supremacist, but it's a very useful kind of white supremacist. So if you just play the game long enough, you can get a nice little cut for yourself. So don't go rocking the boats. And this is why folks like Saga and Zed, even Jelani, like I think they fall into this category of people who say yes, of course, America's white supremacist, but it's also very orderly.
Right. Yeah.
If you just kind of keep your nose down, don't poke the bear, don't make the white people so nervous or resentful, you could do really well in here as a brown person if you just let them run things.
I feel like you kind of get your view of America is only as good as the last founding father that you believe in. It's kind of like, I think at one point you have to stop believing in those guys. I think at some point you have to decide that, okay, you know what, they're all kind of trash. Even Abraham Lincoln, you have to take with a grain of salt, right? It's not easy to appreciate the ethos of this nation. In this context, I actually wanted to get your thoughts because I haven't been down to Georgia and I don't really get a sense of what the layout is, etc., in terms of history and in terms of how the history has contributed to the society, the structure of the society as it is right now. So can you possibly give me an idea?
So Georgia is about 32% Black, right? 32. It's a big margin, but at the statewide level, Black people don't have any real political power, and they don't really have any money, except for a handful of Black families outside of Atlanta who still kind of work for white people, right? So it's a third Black, but it's functionally a slave population. And Black people are especially in the rural parts of the city, are desperately poor. And there's no real communications infrastructure. This is one thing about people who think the internet will save democracy. It just hasn't suffused. I mean, I go 15 miles in any direction from Athens, Georgia, unless that direction is towards Atlanta, I think Zoom would buffer.
Right.
I go 15 miles in any direction. So the rural communications infrastructure is non-existent. So taking over and instituting actually a communications infrastructure as a matter of right, as an institution of freedom, and getting broadband and getting some sort of public access television and getting people to be able to tell their own stories and not just be fed by the same stories that Viacom wants us to hear, or the Cox or iHeartRadio or whatever wants us to hear. That would actually be, I think that would kind of open up a sclerosis. So it would kind of keep things moving in our democracy in a way that's not that would actually enable a quality of democracy. But we have to think in terms of communication infrastructure is just as important for a viable democracy as a clean water infrastructure, which Georgia doesn't have, once again, 15 miles outside of Athens, unless you're going towards Atlanta, right? I was very surprised when it turns out that for Biden, what turned Atlanta blue was kind of suburban whites who are actually pretty conservative. What I wonder is, are company Democrats going to get the idea that maybe you can win Georgia as long as you don't make suburban white people nervous, which means that there will never be any real justice claim for Black people. Joe Biden won Georgia on everything except content. He won it on Trump's bad manners. So you've turned Georgia blue, but you haven't changed anyone's mind about the role of government in their lives. That's either a recipe for a backlash, or it's going to move the whole party to the right. And this is where I think Obama's tenure becomes important, because you have to understand that during Obama's 8 years, the Democratic Party lost, I think it's 1,000 legislative seats, state legislative seats across the nation, because he didn't actually he didn't change anyone's mind about the role of government in his life. And then he won re-election because what he was very good at was getting people to vote for him based on nothing, based on his smile and charm. Right. I think Ilhan Omar had a good quote about that.
What was the quote?
She was like, yeah, Obama was just another pretty face.
Nice.
Pretty face, like the pretty face neoliberal. I thought that was appropriate. So the idea that Biden turned Georgia blue without any content and without changing anyone's mind isn't really particularly good for anyone who thinks that the Democratic Party needs to move left in order to be relevant. And I don't think it's and I think Congress, the center of the Congress might get wiped out in 2022. I wouldn't be surprised if Democrats like lose a ton of seats.
So I kind of want to like come back to a broader question of like the black leadership that the Democratic Party goes to, right? Like the black caucus, etc.
Right.
And it's kind of like the leadership, like Clyburn, like Kamala Harris now, and then like the guy that I saw that the guy that they appointed, Cedric Richmond, who's also like a oil guy. And they're like going for all of these like standard, neoliberal corporate. So what I was going for is that like you said you could get behind a candidate who could at least ensure some amount of institutional justice, but like the Democrats are almost deliberately, it seems like they're avoiding it, right? Like, is there like a strategic need to avoid it? Like, is there a reason why they can't because like just to add as a caveat to this, the ad that you pointed out of Jamie Harrison of the old dirt road or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good ad.
Yeah, that's a really good ad, but I don't know if he really believes in that. It's a grift, I don't know if it's 100% true ad, because obviously he knows that it would work. He knows strategy, but at the same time, like it seems like they're even going there now. They're playing to that, but they're not really doing anything about it. So why it seems like. Again, like to use one of your lines, like you describe white people are either psychopaths or sociopaths. This seems like pretty sociopathic behavior to me. And like, I wonder what you have to say about like the black leadership of the Democratic Party and why they are the way they are.
Right. So, I mean, the best job you can get as a black person in America is actually managing other black people in service of white people. like that is the job of every high functioning, highly like sought after diversity officer or whatever. You manage other black people and corral them in service of black people. So that's the entire CBC, right? Like the entire CBC is to keep black people under control for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And like, that's James Clyburn's job, to like manage black people from their justice, separate them from the righteousness of their justice claim. Depending on who you talk to, that's what HCBUs, historically black HBCUs, like they generate. Like a cadre of political leaders whose job is first and foremost to manage the poor black masses in a way that keeps them from justice. And that,
who's the guy in your, is that in Georgia or like Bakari Sellers? Where is he from?
Yeah, Bakari Sellers, yeah. Nah, he's in South Carolina, but yeah, he's trash.
South Carolina, right? Yeah, okay.
He's trash. Right, but like even think about someone like Van Jones, right? What does Van Jones even believe in? And what does Van Jones believe in? And then what does he feel free to say anytime they put a microphone in front of him? Like he's out there crying on MSNBC. Like, I don't understand. Like, what does this guy believe in? And then what's he actually going to say? Because he might actually have decent beliefs, but all of his money comes from people with awful beliefs. So your concern is interesting. Will the Democratic Party allow someone with actually pro-justice views rise in the Democratic Party if it seems to superficially help them? For example, if Stacey Abrams could deliver 3 congressional seats in Georgia on the strength of a Green New Deal, would Pelosi kill it and rather have Republicans in that seat?
Yes,
than like have Democrats who would threaten her like internal control of the Democratic Party. I know Obama would. Like, what we have to do is watch this guy because he's young and he's going to spend the next 30 years making sure that no Democrat eclipses him. And that,
Fuck,
like,
man.
this guy's narcissism is next level, out of the world. And that's why I think he was so dedicated to taking out Sanders. Because if Sanders comes in and actually advocates for things that Obama said can't be advocated for, it makes Obama look relevant, and people start looking back at his 8 years and saying, like, this guy, he was giving us a lot of lines when he could have fought a lot harder. And I think it jeopardizes his legacy. So Barack Obama is going to spend the next 30 years making sure that the only Democrats who get like any sort of prominence are going to be ones that don't make people ask questions about what he did for his 8 years. And that, I think, is very dangerous. Like, his narcissism is out of control and going to be a problem for the left.
I was wondering about what would be the fictional possibility of a Harris versus Abrams kind of like scenario where the progressive left will have to, like make their peace with one of them, like to truly back. And if Stacey Abrams were to court the progressive left with like some kind of concession of Green New Deal or like or Medicare or something like that.
I don't know if they would go after her. I don't know if they would let her. That's the question, right? Like, if she could say, I can deliver blank and blank Congress seats if you let me run on these progressive issues, I think they'd go after her. I think they would target her. Now, who I'm interested in and who I want to, I just kind of want, every time I'm on someone new show, I want to say Rashida Tlaib 2024. Don't sleep on her. Like, she actually has a technical understanding of government that people don't take seriously, and she's open with real ideas, and like, I think she's got like enough kind of grit. I want to see Rashida Tlaib 2024. I think she can like put some content, some meat on Democratic bones, and at least make debates very interesting about like what the people need in order to like have a good job and be free in their lives. I think she gets it, and she's kind of open, and she's not scared, and she's in a safe district. So like, I like Rashida Tlaib. Like, I hope I'm putting it into the world, speaking it into being.
To come back to this concept of you were saying Black people managing other Black people.
That's a really good job for Black people in America.
Yeah, and like, I'll tell you, like, the place where I feel like this job, now I feel like Black people seem to have gotten a little more of a promotion in some sense, because like they get to manage some white people as well through these kind of like anti-racist like workshops, right? You spoke about how white people are sociopaths, and like you kind of need cultural, like you need to get into the family, right? You need to get into that.
We need to. I need to take over. They need a cultural receivership. I need to take over white culture with respect to their churches, their families, and their schools for like a generation, and then like we'll get a better class of white people.
So okay, so let's go with that, right? Yeah, but the thing that I want to ask you is that like, aren't the anti-racist groups like doing exactly that in a kind of way?
Grifters, yeah, but they're picked by white liberals, right? So now you have this whole grifter class of Black anti-racists who go in and kind of perform the real surgery that I'd like to do. But at the end, there's a lot of crying, people get paid. And at the end, like, Black communities stay poor, stay broke, and white people's politics doesn't actually improve. But that's a good job, right? So you're the Black anti-racist trainer whose job is make white people perform penance or atonement. But then ultimately end up with like no actual change in fundamental beliefs about what the role of government is or what justice requires. And then you just keep on the grift someplace else. And you get threatened by like people like me who actually want to do like real political restructuring and reprogramming. Like that's, but like I'm screwing up their grift.
Right.
But this is also the mental health grift, right? The mental health grift is like your mental health problems are just about your mindset or your chemicals, and not about like the political realities that that like govern the options of your world. And so that's a big grift.
So what is your in terms of your program of restructuring that you're talking about? In a kind of way, they're in the way, right? Like and they're kind of like depriving your program from moving forward. So how do you engage with that? How do you want to take it away from them? What is your strategy in
So
this
I wouldn't
scene?
be surprised. So let's take gender, right? A lot of gender
Mm-hmm.
gender ideology emerges from like family relations and the division of risk and the division of labor within the family. People don't talk about the division of risk very much, but I think it's just as important as the division of labor. But you have to understand that gender egalitarianism is common among lower classes. like like lower classes don't make the same gender discriminations that upper class does. So in this way,
Mm,
both the defense of manhood and feminism are bourgeois ideology, upper class ideology, because at the lower classes, and I would love to see some sort of comparative study about like the gendering of Dalit households in life versus the gendering of Brahmin households in life. I wouldn't be surprised if the gender commitments and the gendering of Brahmin households is more severe and is taken more seriously than the gender of Dalit households, where people are just kind of working and trying to just like
right.
figure it out. Like they like it's not about like patriarchy or anything like that. It's just everyone like just kind of like working to get done. Like in America, what happens in the black in the way that intimate partner violence is kind of the dominant narrative from white women is imposed upon and universalized, is that it just overlooks the bidirectional violence, because
Mm,
like in stigmatized communities and lower class communities, guys are getting hit.
mm,
like just nobody cares because they're pretty much disposable, but like they're getting hit. Like the violence is bidirectional. So, and the
mm.
cause of violence isn't a gender ideology. The cause of violence is like external stress that then just gets like it's people fighting.
Yeah, and
So
that's like a very interesting thing that you bring up, the external stress, the violence perpetuated by upper caste or like white people, supremacists
yeah,
and
that's
in
not good.
power. It's like it's actually a very sadistic violence. It's not
Right,
like I'm hitting you because I'm under stress, like I'm just passing it along.
right.
It's more like I like torturing you,
Yeah.
right? And it's interesting that torture should become emblematic of the United States, like that United States is a country that tortures criminals, and like it's well
Right.
known for committing war crimes like that, because it is kind of emblematic of white culture itself, it seems like, at least in a
Right.
way.
Well, there's a very I read an article, I want to say about 2 years ago. It was about like comparing settler narratives and Native American narratives, and there was like a tribe that did like not have a word or like a conception of sexual assault and sexual violence, because why would you do that to anybody? Why would I do that to anybody? And so like they just didn't understand like why but then with the colonial like narrative imported an idea of property and controlling over your property, and it's with this like kind of like white conception of property came with it like this entitlement to sexual violence, um that like was imported through colonialism to like at least some Native American cultures, because like they just didn't even have a conception of like, yeah, why would I even treat a person like that?
Hmm.
But it's because they were treating them like property. I mean,
Right.
it's because white people were treating everything else like property, and that's why they had a practices of like sexual violence that are just completely like foreign to people who are just used to treating other people like people.
There's like a big movement all over the world, including, I mean, of course, it happened in Latin America.
Right.
It's happening in like India with respect to Islam and stuff, where there's like a movement towards like wanting to have something of a liberation theology, where you kind of go back to a point where capitalism had not yet like interfered through like the colonial project that
Right.
it had, through the imperialist project, like it hadn't even interfered in like these kind of cultures. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure if that's like really an effective anti-capitalist strategy, so to say, but like I'd
You
like to
need
hear what
something.
your thoughts are. Yeah.
You need something, right? Because you can't get rid of religion wholesale, and I don't even think you should, because there needs to be a space for things we don't know. And but whatever religion is practiced and normalized needs to be pro justice,
Hmm.
right? Like can't be a problem for justice. And as it stands, like Christianity in America is actually and this is one thing about Georgia, which I didn't really understand until I moved here and I actually saw the way it works. It's actively regressive. It's actively
Well, like, how do you mean?
it's holding together the racial hierarchy. In Black churches, you're taught that you're not going to get justice here. You're going to get justice in the hereafter. And in white churches, you're taught that like God made this world the way it is, and the way it is the way it ought to be.
Wow.
Like, right. So, like, and I imagine, I mean, I don't know. I don't, so I've never been to India and I've only studied second and third hand, but I imagine that like there are some forms of Hinduism that are actively regressive, not
Of
just
course, yeah.
like banal, but like actually like, no, the caste system is the way it should be. And
Absolutely,
people
yeah.
who, yeah. So like you would act, if you're actually serious about bringing justice, you're going to have to like do some religious reform. There's a section in Hegel where he talks about Napoleon having a problem with, I think it was the Spanish, because he tried to impose the Napoleonic Code, which is just like a lawful code among like provincial Spain. I want to say it was provincial Spain, and it didn't take because of the way the provincial hierarchies were already traditionally established. So they didn't have like the family structure or the ancillary cultural infrastructure to support like a legalistic society. And so like it just never took. Like, and so he was always frustrated. So if you have an anti-justice religion and an anti-justice family structure, you could preach or institute all of the formal political egalitarianism you want. It's not going to take. If
Right.
if the God is telling them that like, you know, the manhood means this and womanhood means that, and the poor deserve this and these people deserve that, it doesn't matter if you institute like a formal electoral strategy to get rid of that, because like the problem is going to be like in these non-political institutions of freedom. So like religion is an institution of freedom. So you can't just ban religion, but you do have to make sure that the religions that are practiced also are consistent with like, you know, the general freedom and equality of all people in the nation, right? And the same way with families. You can't just ban families, and I wouldn't want to ban families. Families are an institution of freedom. Like there's a certain sort of relationship I can have with my wife that I can't have with other people. So I don't want to
Absolutely.
ban families, but we can't normalize the kind of families that are based on a kind of gender hierarchy in terms of like leadership or godliness or holiness or wisdom is like deposited upon men for having a penis, and like and women are somehow excluded from that. So that kind of family isn't going to be consistent with the broader social aims and political aims of a just society, right? And the same with, you can't have an education system that leaves out. And this is where liberalism, and I'll end with this because I got to go pretty soon, because this is where liberalism actually screws up the cultural aspect of education. In an authoritarian regime, you have a minister of truth. You have someone whose job it is to control all of the newspapers and to control all the TV stations, to control the internet. It's like China, right? So like you have like a whole like policing ministry. In liberal regimes, it's a little bit more clever because it's all about what we leave out.
Right.
Right, the devil is what we leave out, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
we don't have stories about like how every person I see in any sort of mainstream media telling you about the Indian immigrant experience is going to be from the upper caste. Like we just leave that out, but
Right.
leaving that out distorts all of your understanding about what it is to be an immigrant in the United States and
Right.
like what it means. Like it distorts all of that. If all of that, so it's in what you leave out. Because if you
Right.
leave out the strategic things, you could kind of shape choices in the way that people feel like they're being free, but they're really being distorted through their ignorance of what you leave out. Because it's a very important fact that we only ever meet the top 5% of,
Most countries, I think. Yeah. So in this like there's just like a last couple of two questions. One simple question. I just wanted to ask you if there is any way in which you feel like Trumpism has instituted any sense of freedom or justice that you think of. This would probably be like, I don't know, you'd probably answer in the negative, I think, but I'd like to hear any kind of thoughts that you would have.
Trump has done something about the national debt, right? So the idea that the national debt is actually means something that we understand trumps explode. And this is one of the virtues of electing a rich guy who's been bankrupt 6 times. It turns out that big money doesn't work the way that your small money works. We create money, and money is a sense of control. So we create money to get people to do things for us, and then when there's too much money, they stop doing things for us. So we have to claw back some of our money through taxes. But like money is about like balancing social control. So you have to watch out for inflation. But the debt is just a made up kind of number. We have nukes. Like we're a state, like we're a nation that buys things and has nukes. So like our nuclear weapons backs our currency, not gold, not anything else. So like this whole idea that the national debt means something meaningful, I think Trump
obliterated that.
Obliterated. Yeah. I think that's like a useful. He obliterated the idea that the national debt means something because he was ballooning the national debt while working class wages were rising a little bit, and the stock market was doing fine, and actually people's standards of living wasn't getting worse. So and like it didn't, and we didn't hit inflation targets. Right. We were not even hitting inflation targets. So the idea that like if you make the national debt bigger, inflation will go up. Well, no, inflation turns out to be like more complicated than that, and it's targeted with certain goods in certain ways, and you could actually increase productivity in a way that would like you could both pay people and increase productivity, and that would be good for everyone involved. So in India, they had something like a federal job guarantee. They had it's like a rural job guarantee, and a guy named Dylan Matthews did a study on it, and it said that it actually turned out that the federal job guarantee in rural India actually increased private sector job growth because it actually like facilitated roads and all of these productivity enhancing assets people were now paid to like build. And so like general productivity went up for people in the private sector, and it got people used to working in like the corporate atmosphere. So like it was, and it increased the working conditions because people then now knew what to ask for in terms of better working conditions. So like actually directly creating jobs from the federal government and putting money into the people's hands that way by giving them just well-paying jobs actually increased private sector growth in a way just by increasing productivity and enhancing assets. For example, in Georgia, the weather's nice. So if you actually created a cultural and material infrastructure all over Georgia, I think and you spent the money to do that, it would actually probably drive down inflation because everyone would be so much more productive. There'd be more competition of goods produced. Like it would actually be good, right? And it makes everywhere more livable.
So the thing that you're saying is very optimistic, but you also, I remember, last question to you, I think, you basically said that it's probably the coolest line that you've said, like my grandmother kept her money in the King James Bible. So that because her grandmother gave it to the Freedmen's Bank and it shut down. So what you're talking about is something that's like a level of optimism that probably is not shared by, and I don't even know what demographic believes it, because it seems like it's almost like a millennial thing, this optimism, or like at least a kind of desperate hope.
White leftists from the suburbs.
Right. Yeah.
White leftists from the suburbs have my level of optimism. Yeah. Right. So like people ask.
So the question would be, how do you go about doing that, and like how optimistic are you about realizing this vision in Athens, Georgia? And like, tell me how you plan on doing it, and like how you're doing it in general in your life, and also how broadly you think people can do it.
So I think people have to see Black people take out white people like in public. Right. So for the next time I go, that's why every time I go on Rising, like I don't play nice. The next time I go on Rising, I'm going to say, thank you guys for coming on to my show. This should be a very interesting next 10 minutes. Right. So and Saga's going to and Crystal's going to just like that fucker. And, but like every time you got to do that because people have to see the confrontations with power, and they have to see me like live another day. Everyone, like for example, with Rising, every time I go on, people say that's the last time he's going to go on. There's no way he's going to go on. But it turns out if enough people like email Crystal and say, you know, that guy should go on, I end up going back on. So, and Sagar emailed me, and that was funny because he emailed me and saying like, I'm his mom's favorite guest. And he was pissed.
Yeah, that's funny.
He's like, well, you know,
funny.
my mom likes you, so like, yeah, that's you're my mom's favorite. I don't know what that means, but like, that's, because like, anyway, so like, people have to see like publicly take out, do things that you're not supposed to do to white people in order to get rid of the cynicism, and then like live to tell about it.
Right. That's like a cultural thing. In terms of government, what do you think should happen for people to start believing in voting their interests?
Okay, so we just need to pass a suite of transparency initiatives. Right? We need a suite of transparency. We need to force Democrats to say what they believe in public. And I think we could spend a whole 2 years just focusing on that. Like, just like in terms of electoral politics, it's too easy to keep getting elected or get elected without having to actually be public about what you're going to fight for and why. So we need to talk about the political and cultural machinery of democracy, about like public accountability for elected officials before we think we can just vote our way out of this problem, right? Because we're going to have to like see politicians say some awful things publicly and be held accountable for it. Like Nancy Pelosi took one hard interview on CNN, and I don't even think she's going to do another interview on CNN now because she feels like it was an affront to her dignity. Right. So like any sort of institutions of public accountability that are serious and slightly antagonistic, we need to get behind if we're going to resuscitate our democracy. Because once people start seeing people like get kind of, I don't know, aggressive about the fight in public and still win, then it'll embolden more people to get aggressive about the fight.